Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. Let's talk about The Hobbit. Okay, so off the bat, there's two major problems with this movie. Just a little background. I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan. I've read the books. There's a poster on my wall behind there. Okay, just to prove I'm not joking. There it is on the wall behind me. That's a map of Middle Earth. And a friend of mine realized we both like the movies. We marathoned kind of all the originals and all the original Lord of the Rings movies. And then when The Hobbit came out, we were excited. So we're like, yeah, let's go see it. So it's been our thing to just the two of us go and see all of these movies. And it's been a kind of a nice little tradition. This has been our last little trip back to the world of Middle Earth before they eventually make the Silmarillion, which I'm sure they'll find another way to franchise more Hobbit material, I'm sure. Yeah, and the major complaints people have with these movies is entirely valid, and I'll bring them up here. Just the obvious ones, get it out of the way. You have a book that's about that big. It's smaller than the shortest Lord of the Rings book from that trilogy, and they stretch it into into three films that are, some of them are like 3 hours long. This one was, like 2.5 hours long? I think it's maybe the shortest at 2.5 hours long. But they're stretching the source material really thin, and they're padding it with extra stuff. They're making up entire characters, and there's just a lot of padding. So this movie has a lot of unnecessary padding. All of them pretty much do. You have the golden smog scene where, they cover him in gold, and there's this elaborate chase scene in the previous one, and then in An Unexpected Journey, there's all this stuff with Radagast, and they add in all these characters. And so, yeah, it's not the worst padded film, because the battle scenes is called the Battle of the Five Armies. You expect it to be for there to be these intricate battle scenes and all these armies marching and stuff like that. That's par for the course. But then there are some moments where it's really obvious it's padding. And I'm so used to them padding these films that even though it's not the worst padded of these films, it's so obvious now. There's the scene there's this subplot they add in where Thorin basically has gold fever from the DuckTales cartoon. He gets crazy because of the gold. And there's this scene where he imagines himself sinking into this golden floor. And as soon as I'm seeing that, I was just sitting there and I'm like, oh yeah, that's padding. It's immediate now. It's just like, this is here to take up time to stretch this movie to 2.5 hours because, Peter Jackson can't make a film that's shorter than 2.5 hours. So that's the major concern people have with these films, and it's entirely relevant, it's entirely well-founded, and it's entirely present here. It's what you'd expect at this point. And the second problem is a problem that's created by the original films themselves. This is not an epic story, and they try to make it... They've been doing the same thing since movie one, but here it's really apparent this is not an epic story, and they're trying to make it an epic. And now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how the original Lord of the Rings trilogy kind of ruined cinema. The idea for making a Lord of the Rings movie had been kicking around for a while, and in fact other people made other Lord of the Rings movies. There's Ralph Bakshi and the Rankin Bass animated Hobbit film. I think back in the 60s or 70s, the Beatles were supposed to play the Hobbits. Two of them were going to be Frodo and Sam, one was going to be Gollum, one was going to be Gandalf, and that was an idea kicking around for a while. So people have had this idea for a while, and there was a resurgence of just the book. The book was kind of the Harry Potter of its time. It kind of, people were writing Frodo lives on walls and stuff like that, because people really, I think after its initial publishing, people kind of rediscovered it and really got into it and really got into the history and the mythology and the story. So the idea for making Lord of the Rings was around for a while, and then when Peter Jackson went to make, all three movies, all three books into movies. You know, it had never been done before, so they were playing around with the format. Can we get away with it in one? Can we get away with it in two? Eventually, it became three, filmed all at the same time, and it was such an ambitious project that they were basically inventing new technology. As the film was coming out, the program for CGI fire, or believable CGI fire, hadn't been written yet. So when they were shooting the Balrog scene, they didn't have that code. But by the time the movie had come out, somebody had written that code. So they were able to incorporate that into the film. And then Gollum's a good example. That was the first. It's not the first time mocap was used, of course, but the way it was used to that extent, to that level of detail, in tandem with the animation compartment and the design department for such a central pivotal character, that had never been done before. And they even had to completely redesign Gollum because of Andy Serkis's performance. They saw what he was doing and it didn't match the character they had designed, so they had to completely redesign Gollum. 6 months of design work, basically had to start from scratch, and for the better if you see that in original design. There's nothing wrong with it, but again, what they did come up with in tandem was amazing. It was something that was pretty much groundbreaking. It was like an old school epic, but with all the advantages of modern day technology and cinematic storytelling. So it was the first time anyone had ever done that, pretty much. But then, after it became this multi-billion-dollar success, everybody wanted to copy it. So you have these elaborate epic battle scenes in movies that don't really need them. Like, I know there was a battle in the original Lion the Witch in the Wardrobe book, but I don't remember it being this big, epic, grand scale thing. And I mean, you can imagine that one of the reasons that project was greenlit, because they're like, okay, we'll do the ending like Lord of the Rings. Even Harry Potter, which hadn't been finished being written at the time, she had to write in a giant battle scene where everybody throughout the entire series came back at the end and basically raided the castle. Right? So that was kind of, in movies that you wouldn't think would have, like Maleficent has a large battle like that. I haven't seen the film, but really? And that's kind of been the mainstay for cinema for a long, long time, is to make a Lord of the Rings style epic. And The Hobbit is not an epic story. It's a simple little adventure story about a guy who goes off into the woods with a gang of dwarves, and they're trying to steal treasure for a dragon, and they run into trolls and spiders and mysterious wood elves, and there's riddles in the dark, and there's all kinds of fun stuff. And a man who changes into a bear, and it's a fairy tale. It's a wonderful little fairy tale, and it's one of my favorite books. It's the quintessential adventure story. But the problem with that is the world that Peter Jackson created in The Lord of the Rings, the original movies, is a completely different one than is in the story of The Hobbit. You see this in, there's the moment in the original trilogy where Bilbo Baggins is telling kids the famous troll story about how they tricked the trolls and the trolls all turned to stone. And it's told like a fairy tale, and that's very much what The Hobbit is. This is like passed into legend, and it's been exaggerated, and who really knows how it went on there, and it all seems a bit fantastical. But you get to this, and there's like big grim battle sequences, and it doesn't, and it's trying to be an epic, but it's not. It's a little adventure story, and they even try to bring in, they've been doing this with all the movies, trying to bring in like Sauron is rising and coming to power kind of thing, and like kind of like foreshadowing what's going to happen in the Lord of the Rings movies. But that's way bigger than this story. Like, Sauron is supposed to be long forgotten at this point, so when they bring him up again, it kind of doesn't make sense. It's like, oh, at one point, you know, they basically see Sauron and the Ringwraiths, and then they push them away. And then it's like, oh, okay, now I have to fight this little battle over here. And it's like, really? It's like, you went from this, like, oh, all of evil is returning to the world, oh, but we're going to fight over treasure kind of thing. It doesn't jive. It just doesn't mesh. There's a shot in this movie which kind of completely pulls me out of it. It's after this big epic battle. You know, a couple of the dwarves who we've gotten to know, the few dwarves who we actually get to know in the film, a couple of them die and are slaughtered, and everything's gray, and there's snow, and, you know, Lake Town has been destroyed, all these people are homeless, and the dwarf hall is in ruins, and just everything is just wrecked after the battle, and there's a scene of the Elf King looking around and seeing all these slain elves as well, all these corpses of elves and just arrows sticking out of them, and it's like the aftermath of a war, and Bilbo and Gandalf sit down, and Gandalf's trying to light his pipe, and they don't say anything to each other, and they just sit there. And it's not like they're sitting down after a fun adventure, it's like they're sitting down after a horrible, horrible battle. Like, if I was Bilbo, I would be so mad at all these people. I would be, why did you drag me into your business after this bloody, bloody war? It's like being drafted in the army, and then, getting to the trenches and seeing how things are, and just wanting to be home because of the horror of it, not because you're kind of a whiny hobbit out of your comfort zone. And that's the problem with it. You don't see a relationship develop between Bilbo and Gandalf other than the fact that they have to, so the Lord of the Rings can take place. He talks about Thorin as a friend. Thorin always treats him like garbage, quite honestly. Thorin's always mean to Bilbo throughout. He's mean to everyone. Like, dragon fever. There's no dragon fever. He's just a jerk. And again, yeah, that was I don't know who decided that. But, that's the big problem, because he starts talking fondly about these people he was on an adventure with, and even, like, looking at the dwarves and saying, oh, if you're ever in Hobbit, stop by. It's like, why? They've brought you nothing but, like, there's no joy. I think that's the part of it, the part of it. Like, adventures are fun and exciting, and there's danger, but there's a fun nature to it. There's a joy that comes out of going on a quest, and there's a sense of pride you get from defeating a monster and all this kind of stuff. But this setting the movie in this universe, it's so bleak that it's just, you don't get why Bilbo would look back on it fondly. I mean, he's just survived this crazy big battle, and he didn't sign up for that. I mean, there's stealing gold from a dragon, and then there's a bloody war where all your friends get slaughtered, and it just does not mesh. The Hobbit story, the beauty of it is it's supposed to be this footnote that becomes this big and important later, and that nobody really realizes it. But the movie can't forget that it takes place in the Lord of the Rings universe and not the Hobbit universe. Even when you read the books, the writing styles are really different, and you don't get that. That should have been different in this movie too. This movie should have been one movie, for one thing, and it should have been a fairy tale, not an epic adventure story. Do I have anything good to say about the Hobbit movies? Yes, I do. As a matter of fact, I quite like them. My favorite parts of all of these films have always been the parts that are closest to what's in the book. Really, the riddles in the dark sequence and the spider sequence, and Bilbo talking with Smaug and Bilbo talking with Gollum, like when it's just the dialogue from the book and the characters being the characters. I mean, those are the best parts of the movie for me. It's the visual effects. You're looking at Weta Digital, second to none. Peter Jackson knows how to compose a shot. He knows how to bring many elements together, not always jiving, but he can tell a story on this scale. You get your massive battle scenes, the giant armies marching and moving, nice action in there. There were some interesting choices in terms of the action choreography. I felt like they wanted to go with this. They had basically done battles in different locations before. You're fighting in the woods and you're in caves. Lava was a prominent theme in the original films, and now they're going with snow. So there's this battle on top of ice, and people are falling through the ice, and they're trying not to land on the ice. And there's this big hammer thing that swings around and cracks the ice, and there's all this kind of tension. Legolas has a fight on top of this falling bridge. As they're fighting, the bridge is collapsing, and he amazingly manages not to die and fall to his death at the bottom of this chasm as this is happening. But, it's kind of goofy, but at the same time, I appreciate the effort. I appreciate the fact that they were... That's an important thing in action sequences, to be aware of your location and how to utilize it, how to do fun things with it. So even when it went over the top, I didn't mind, because they were being creative, they were trying new things. It was something I hadn't seen before. There are a lot of fan servicey moments in the movie too, but I'm okay with that. I'm okay with, Saruman coming and fighting the 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 ring wraiths, and and Galadriel kicking some ass and stuff like that. I'm fine with moments like that. It's fun. It's fun to see Legolas be a superhero again. A lot of people are annoyed by that. I'm not. It may be goofy, but it's fun and it's cool and it looks great. And I don't know. I know some people are like, "Oh, Legolas is bland." I think he's a fun character. He's got a sense of humor to him as well, and I don't know. He's a fun action star. Some of the big battle sequences, it's kind of hard to tell who's who. All the dwarves kind of look the same. All the orcs kind of look the same. So when they're different groups of orcs fighting different dwarves and it's happening really fast, you're kind of like, okay, where are we? And they're fighting in these like ruins and things too, so the location doesn't look that different. So sometimes that was a bit hard to keep track of. And the setup for the movie isn't bad either. The dragon's dead, now we have to divide up the treasure and we're fighting over it. And that's a fun setup. After you make The Lord of the Rings, it's really hard to top that. And especially after everybody has aped to that, it's really hard to top that. And I think that was the problem. Because you can't, it's really hard to recapture that lightning in a bottle, right? For people who don't know the history, Guillermo del Toro, Peter Jackson was always going to produce these series of films, and I think it was only going to be 1 or 2 films. They were going to split it up maybe into 2 films. But Guillermo del Toro was supposed to direct, and when I heard that, I was really excited, because I really like Peter Jackson's version of Middle-earth, but Guillermo del Toro has a very different kind of artistic sensibilities, and in terms of design, his monsters look different and his worlds look different, and there's kind of an ancient myth, like the Lord of the Rings worlds that Peter Jackson created are kind of earthy and lived in. Guillermo del Toro's are more fantastical and stylized, but kind of ancient and mystic at the same time, and that would have been really cool to see, and I was excited to see somebody else do something a little different with it. We were so familiar with what Middle-earth looked like. It would have been nice not to really go back and revisit it nostalgically, but see it in through a completely different set of eyes. That would have been cool. And again, I don't know why he dropped out of the project. I don't know what happened there. And I think Peter Jackson just kind of took the reins, because I'm not sure if it was some legal reason or nobody else wanted to do it, but I think ultimately it was like, well, you've done it before, this, forwards and backwards. Peter Jackson is retreading a formula, which he created. It's kind of like, well, you've done it before, you've made Lord of the Rings, you can make the Hobbit movies. That's what it feels like. He makes it, to his credit, he makes it feel effortless, but also there's a bit of autopilot in there, if you know what I mean. There's a little bit of, well, I've done it before, let's just take those same tropes and do it again with a different story, which sometimes is fine, but again, The Hobbit is not the same story as Lord of the Rings. It's a different story, it has a different tone, a different feel, it's written differently, there's the plot points are different, there are different stakes, and the two don't really, it was an ambitious thing, it was an interesting idea to try to merge these two and try to make this more of a prequel than just kind of a standalone adventure. But, ultimately that's where the problems start. So there are a good series of movies. I'm probably not going to rewatch the first one anytime soon. I do like that Riddles in the Dark sequence. There's a lot of little bits I like in the second and the last one. And, there are some fun action sequences, and it is well done. It's a fun movie. If you're not a fan of Lord of the Rings, don't bother. This isn't going to win you over at this point. But if you are, there's no reason not to see it. I mean, I'll admit, I haven't rewatched the previous 2 installments, but I did actually quite like the second installment quite a bit. And even the first installment, it was kind of worth it just for the Riddles in the Dark scene, just to see that on film. This one, all in all, I liked it. I'm glad I saw it. And there are a lot of good things about the film.